98 people stepped into the jungle that morning, their faces filled with excitement, fear, and hope. They weren't explorers chasing fame, and they weren't tourists chasing thrill. They were just ordinary people, friends, families, co-workers, drawn into the heart of a place locals whispered about but never dared to enter. A place where the trees seemed to close in like walls, where the air itself pressed heavy against your chest, and where the birds fell silent the deeper you went. By sunset, only 3 would return. Imagine the scene. The dense jungle swallowing voices, footsteps crunching on wet earth, shadows stretching long between vines. Every direction looked the same, like the forest itself was alive and shifting, waiting. For hours, the group laughed, shouted, even sang to shake off the fear, but as daylight faded, the laughter began to sound hollow. The first to disappear was a man at the back of the line, gone between one step and the next, no scream, no trace. They searched, called his name, but there was only silence. Panic started to ripple. The leaders tried to keep calm, insisting they move forward, but unease had already rooted itself in every mind. Some swore they saw shapes darting just beyond the torchlight. Others felt a breath of cold air brush the back of their necks. The jungle had grown impossibly vast, almost endless, like it was bending reality itself. One by one, people vanished, sometimes with a cry, sometimes with nothing at all, until the group of 98 was whittled down to 3. When those survivors finally stumbled out days later, clothes torn, eyes hollow, they spoke of things no one could believe. Their stories didn't match. One claimed the jungle swallowed people whole. Another whispered of voices calling them deeper, promising freedom. The third said nothing at all, staring blankly, as though part of them had never left. What happened in that jungle? Was it madness, something supernatural, or something far worse? The truth hides between their broken words, and tonight we're going to follow their path back into the shadows. The 3 survivors who emerged from the jungle were strangers to each other before the journey began. Among them was Amina, a young teacher who had joined the expedition with her cousin. Beside her walked Haroon, a quiet man in his late 30s, an engineer with little interest in legends but a deep sense of curiosity. The third was a boy barely 19, Sammy, who had signed up on impulse, chasing adventure. 95 others who went in with them never returned. But why were they there at all? That's where the story darkens. The expedition wasn't random. It had been organized around an old rumor, the kind of story whispered from one generation to the next in nearby villages. They said deep in the jungle lay ruins older than memory, a place where people went searching for treasure, miracles, or truth, and none ever came back. For decades, these tales are dismissed as folklore, warnings meant to keep children from wandering too far. Yet when photographs surfaced online of stone structures half buried in vines, the legend began to feel disturbingly real. A wealthy sponsor put out the call. 98 volunteers, guided by hired trackers, would enter and document what was inside. Cameras, equipment, even satellite tracking, all meant to ensure safety. But technology doesn't matter when the place itself feels alive. By the second day, radios stopped working. The GPS spun in circles. Every path forward looked the same, and every attempt to turn back only led them deeper in. The survivors later spoke about how the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder at times, heavier at others, pressing down like an unseen weight. People began arguing. Some accused the guides of taking them in circles. Others whispered that someone among them wanted the group lost. Sleep became impossible. Each time their eyes closed, they swore they heard whispers, soft and urgent, threading through the leaves. Amina said she dreamed of her cousin calling her name from beyond the trees. Though her cousin had vanished hours earlier, Haroon insisted the forest wasn't killing them outright, but pulling them apart, feeding on their fear. Sammy refused to speak of what he saw, but his trembling hands told their own story. The deeper they went, the more people disappeared, until the large expedition turned into a scattering of small, broken groups. Some refused to move forward and stayed behind, believing rescue would come. Others pressed on, convinced the ruins were close. None of those groups were seen again. By the time Amina, Haroon, and Sammy stumbled out, days later, the question was no longer what lies in the jungle, but why did it let only 3 of them go? When the 3 survivors recounted their journey, their words painted not one story, but 3 different versions of the same nightmare. And in those conflicting details, the true horror began to emerge. Amina admitted that fear had twisted her. After her cousin vanished, she clung desperately to anyone who promised safety, even if it meant ignoring the cries of others who begged for help. She recalled a woman who had fallen behind, her foot caught in a root. The group had urged her to hurry, but when she screamed for someone to stop and pull her free, Amina walked on. "I told myself we couldn't risk it," she whispered later, "but the truth is, I didn't want to look back." Her guilt became its own shadow, a constant weight she carried. Haroon, on the other hand, revealed a darker suspicion. He was convinced that someone inside the group wanted them lost. He claimed he caught one of the hired trackers deliberately cutting markings from trees, erasing the only signs of their path. But when he tried to confront the man, the tracker disappeared that very night. Was it the jungle, or something more human, that silenced him? Haroon's version made the expedition sound less like a tragedy of chance and more like a carefully orchestrated trap. Then there was Sammy, the youngest. While he rarely spoke, fragments of his story slipped through in feverish whispers. He said he saw figures moving between the trees. Human figures dressed in the same clothes as the ones who had already vanished. They weren't dead, he muttered once, trembling. They were different, like the jungle had taken them and given them back. The others dismissed it as exhaustion, but his terrified eyes suggested otherwise. The jungle itself seemed to feed on these fractures. Every night, the survivors said, brought new arguments. Some wanted to turn back, some wanted to push forward, and some simply collapsed in despair. Loyalties shifted, friendships broke, and trust dissolved until survival meant suspicion. The larger group no longer moved as one. It split into fragments, each competing to stay alive, each convinced their way was the only way out. And in that chaos, more subtle horrors crept in. Supplies went missing. Food vanished from packs. Water that had been rationed carefully one moment was gone the next. Some swore they saw their own belongings carried by others, but no confrontation ever ended cleanly. Fear had turned them into strangers, and strangers into enemies. For the 3 who finally emerged, the memory of those moments lingered heavier than the jungle itself. Amina could not shake the guilt of leaving people behind. Haroon's mind circled endlessly around the thought that someone had orchestrated their suffering. And Sammy, he avoided mirrors, certain that if he stared long enough, he'd see the jungle staring back. And here lies the chilling question. Was the jungle simply a backdrop for human weakness? Or was it something more, something that thrived on division, feeding on fear, pushing people to destroy one another until only 3 remained? By the 4th night, the jungle no longer felt like a place. It felt like a presence. Every rustle of leaves sounded deliberate. Every gust of wind whispered like a warning. The survivors couldn't rest. They sat in circles, torches shaking in their hands, watching one another as much as the shadows. Amina had stopped trusting her own ears. She swore she heard her cousin's laughter drifting between the trees. Light, familiar, comforting. Yet when she ran toward it, all she found was silence. She never told the others how far she had wandered before realizing she couldn't see the campfire anymore. She barely made it back. Something inside her whispered that if she'd taken one more step, she would never have returned. Haroon, meanwhile, grew more certain that they weren't alone. His suspicion boiled into paranoia. He began carving marks into trees, quick and sharp, just to test if they'd vanish overnight. And they did. Each morning, the marks were gone. Either someone from the group erased them, or the jungle itself did not allow signs of escape. His frustration turned into anger, and soon he accused anyone who met his eyes for too long. Sammy, the youngest, was the most unsettled. His silence grew heavier, his eyes wide and distant. One night, While the others argued, he whispered something that chilled Amina. "They're still here. All of them. Walking beside us. Watching. Waiting." When she asked who, he just pointed into the darkness. She didn't dare look too long. Tensions snapped the following day. Supplies had nearly run out. The group, now fractured into small clusters, was breaking apart completely. A fight erupted over the last of the food. Voices rose, accusations flew, and in the chaos, someone screamed. Not from anger, but from terror. They all turned and saw it. At first, it looked like one of their missing companions, standing just beyond the tree-line. Clothes torn, face pale, eyes empty. Then another appeared. And another. Figures half recognizable, half wrong, swaying like shadows, pretending to be human. The group froze. Some called out the names of those figures, desperate for them to step closer. Others begged them not to. Amina felt her chest tighten. What if her cousin was among them? What if she was still alive? Haroon held her back. His voice was harsh, low, almost breaking. "That's not them. Don't you see? That's what the jungle wants." But Sammy didn't listen. His breath came fast, uneven. He stumbled forward, whispering names, tears streaming down his face. The closer he stepped, the more the figures seemed to blur, their outlines bending like smoke. And then a sound. Not a scream, not a voice. A low, deep rumble, vibrating through the ground itself. The trees trembled. The air grew colder, heavier, until every breath burned. The jungle was shifting, responding. Everyone knew, without speaking, that the line had been crossed. Something was coming. The clearing erupted into chaos. Sammy had already stepped too far, his torchlight spilling across the pale faces in the trees. But then came the twist no one expected. One of those figures spoke. Not in whispers, not in some inhuman growl, but in a trembling, familiar voice. "Amina, help me." It was her cousin's voice. Clear, desperate. Amina's heart slammed in her chest. Her cousin was alive. She was certain. The others warned her it was a trick, but the pull was unbearable. Every instinct screamed at her to run forward, to drag her cousin back from that line of shadows. Haroon grabbed her arm, holding her back. But in that moment, something cracked between them. "Don't you see?" he shouted. "It's lying to you. It's lying to all of us." And yet, his own eyes betrayed him. Across the clearing, he saw another figure standing apart from the rest. His wife, the one he had lost years ago, long before the jungle. She was dead. He knew it, but there she stood, smiling faintly, beckoning him closer. The survivors had thought the jungle wanted their fear. But the truth was worse. It wanted their memories, their grief, their weakest points. Then came betrayal. In the struggle to hold Amina back, Haroon loosened his grip just long enough. Sammy slipped past, running straight into the shadows. His scream tore through the clearing, and then cut off, swallowed by silence. When the torch fell from his hand, the light revealed nothing. No boy, no footprints, just earth unbroken. The group broke apart completely. Some ran after Sammy, desperate to save him. Others turned on each other, convinced someone had led them into this trap from the start. Blades flashed in torchlight. Rage drowned reason. And through it all, the jungle shifted again. The figures began to multiply, stepping closer, their faces drawn from every survivor's memory. Fathers, mothers, lovers, children, all standing in impossible silence, waiting to be believed. Amina's cousin, Haroon's wife, Sammy's vanished companions. All of them. But here was the twist that shattered everything. One figure in the crowd looked exactly like Amina herself. Same face, same torn clothes, same wide, terrified eyes. The double lifted its hand and whispered, "Leave him. Only one of us gets out." Amina froze. Haroon saw it too. If the jungle could make copies of them, if it already had, then who was real? Who was already claimed? The survivors realized the nightmare wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about identity, trust, betrayal. And as the torches flickered lower, that question became deadly. The jungle burned with silence, as if holding its breath. Figures of the lost pressed closer, faces shining pale in the flicker of failing torches. Amina clutched her chest, staring at her double in the tree-lean. Haroon trembled, torn between rage and longing as his wife's ghost-like smile beckoned him. "Don't move," Amina whispered, though her own voice shook. "That's not them. It's not us." But it was too late. Haroon stepped forward. The grief he had buried for years surged stronger than fear, stronger than reason. He reached for the outstretched hand of the woman who looked like his wife. For a fleeting second, her fingers brushed his, and then her face twisted, melting into something inhuman. Haroon screamed as the jungle swallowed him whole, dragged into the shadows. His torch fell, sputtering. He was gone. Now only Amina remained. Alone, surrounded. Her double stepped into the clearing, torchlight dancing across identical eyes. The voice was calm, steady, horrifyingly familiar. "You can leave," it said, "but only if you choose to become me." Amina's mind reeled. Was this the jungle's trap all along? To consume her and let the copy walk free? She remembered Haroon's paranoia, Sammy's whispers, the villagers' warnings. Maybe no one had ever returned from this place. Not really. Maybe only the jungle's versions ever walked out. The figures closed in. Her cousin's voice echoed, pleading. Sammy's face flickered in the dark. Every direction offered someone she loved, someone she couldn't bear to abandon. And yet, deep down, she knew none of them were real. She lifted her torch. The double didn't flinch, it only smiled wider. "Then burn," Amina whispered, and she threw the flame down. The jungle erupted. Fire leapt across dry leaves, rushing up vines, swallowing branches. Figures screamed, not like humans, but like echoes tearing apart. The air shook with their shrieks. Amina ran, blinded by smoke, her lungs tearing with every breath. And somehow, she stumbled out. When she was found days later, ragged and delirious, she repeated the same words over and over. "I didn't leave anyone behind. I burned them all." But here's the final twist. The rescuers who carried her back noticed something strange. Her eyes, once brown, were now a deep, unnatural green, the exact color of the jungle leaves. She smiled faintly when they asked what happened inside, and though her voice was soft, it carried an uncanny echo. 3 survivors had come out. Amina was one of them. Or was she the jungle's copy? When Amina emerged from the jungle, the world seemed brighter than it had any right to be. Sunlight touched her face, birds called overhead, and the weight of the forest finally fell away. Yet the shadows clung to her eyes, deep and restless. She was alive. She had escaped. But at what cost? Rescuers asked about the others. 98 had gone in. Why had only 3 returned? Amina gave fragments of answers. She spoke of Haroon, the man who trusted too deeply in what he wanted to see. She spoke of Sammy, the boy who chased ghosts and paid the price. And she admitted her own weakness, the moment she almost followed the voice of her cousin into the dark. But then her words faltered, because the truth wasn't so simple. For every explanation, there was another question. Did Haroon fall to grief, or did the jungle itself take him? Did Sammy really vanish, or was he changed into one of the figures they saw? Even Amina's survival was uncertain. When she looked into a mirror days later, she hesitated, studying the faint green shimmer in her eyes. Was it just exhaustion, or had the jungle marked her forever? The mystery of the jungle remained. Technology couldn't map it. Science couldn't explain it. Villagers shook their heads when outsiders asked questions. It doesn't matter what's inside, they said. What matters is that people still go in. And maybe that's the truth Amina carried with her. The jungle wasn't just a place. It was a mirror. It showed people what they most longed for, and in that longing, it broke them. The 95 who didn't return hadn't all died violently. Some had walked willingly into the dark, chasing voices they could not resist. In the end, the question wasn't whether the jungle was haunted or cursed. The question was, when faced with our deepest desire, do we have the strength to turn away? For Amina, the answer came in fire. She chose to destroy the illusions, even knowing it might mean burning what little hope remained. That choice carried her out, but it also left her wondering who she truly was when she emerged. Survivor or copy? As she sat before a camera weeks later, recounting the story for the world, her final words lingered like an echo. Not everyone who comes out of the jungle should be trusted, and maybe that's the lesson left behind. The jungle will always be there, waiting, testing, calling. The next time someone offers adventure, mystery, or treasure, remember the 98 who went in and the 3 who came out. Because sometimes survival isn't about finding your way back. It's about deciding what part of yourself you're willing to lose.